Okay, so let's get started. Did you get a chance to look up things over the weekend with the recorded lecture, the link I gave you? Uh, if you got a chance to go through it, or if you had a question that I can answer, I'd be happy to do that. If all good to go and you're okay, you want to catch up on that later, that's fine as well. All right. So how was the recording, by the way, Tristan? All right. Okay, so we're going to start with a topic called Internet Challenges, Info Sourcing, Data Types, and Surveys. That is all that we will be covering for the traditional research methods. And I'll also give you another piece of recording as well, which is to do with what we'll be doing anyways, but could be a backup or some additional info that could be useful. So that's going to come as well later. I'll send you the links. So right now I'm going to start with these sequence of slides that's going to cover these topics. To begin with, let's look at main sources of collecting information. As you can see in this slide, it is showing that there are main search engines, which is different from the other types, which apparently simulate as if they are the true internet, but they're not. Basically, they're just piggy banking on the main search engines. For instance, Firefox is not a true search engine, for your information. There are others as well, which are called meta crawlers or meta search engines. DuckDuckGo, for example, it has something which they sell as their trademark, which is the anonymity or secure searches, but that is not truly a main search engine, um, and so on and so forth. So to know that the main search engines are Google, Bing, or Internet Explorer, which is from Microsoft. Then you've got Yandex, which is another kind of search engine that's more to do with searches in Eastern European countries. And there is Baidu, Baidu, another search engine that's more prevalent in China. And surprising for you, probably or not, I don't know, but Yahoo is the main search engine for those searching in Japan. For instance, it is more famous in Japanese, um, language for Yahoo to be preferable, more preferable than Google if they're doing local searches, and so it continues. But here I'll point out that there is main search engines as a differentiator. There is a specialized search engines, which is, not the kind of term I'd like to use. Apparently, there is no other term for it. What specialized here means is that these could even be, you know, a domain of searches that specialize in extracting certain type of info, or they're more focused in finding searches for, let's say, academic papers, research papers. So even those are called specialized search engines. They're not truly main search engines, but they specialize in the sense of what they look for or what they get for you. And there is a lot of detailed information. We call it reference guides, or you could call them, as an itinerary of specialized search engines that's given to you. I don't know if you had a chance to look it up, but it is part of your Dropbox. It is in the folders called specialized search engines. No, not really. I can't exactly remember, but I think I can point you to them. But they could work really nicely if you're doing your research and you want to get to some specific type of topic. So let me show you what I mean or what I'm referring to. If you look up in Dropbox, I think it is under the or inside of a folder called Research Information Reference 5.0. It is pretty much a concise format of where you can find reference booklets, like these resource reference booklets. They're all combined together and placed in one book we call Research Information Reference. So if I click on this, and let me just copy the password here, and I'll open it for you. So this is the book. And here in this book, you can see in the topics that are itemized with these tabs, it says Internet information. So resources, uh, and then it says, where is it? The special list of specialized search engines. So if you go into this list, you will find that we have these arranged very nicely under different topics. So, if you click on those links, it would take you to those specialized search engines. Like, for instance, for academic, science, arts, books, and journals, you can click on this list, and this page opens up. On the left, in first column, you could see that these links are quick links for you to click on. And on the right hand side, it has more details of what they are about. And they are rated as well. So this rating is based on a formula. It is defined basically more detailed information on how we come up with these numbers. That's given earlier in these chapters. You can look them up, but this is just to point you to the kind of search engines which are listed here. We call them specialized search engines. Okay. These could be portals also, and the search can be internal. It has nothing to do with Google, but rather it's an environment which allows you to search for things with the collection of those pages, including some documents that you can easily get to without using any queries. So you can just click on these links. Anyway, so that's an intro for you to look up specialized search engines. Then there are meta search engines, which is, really not the true search engines, but rather, as I said, meta crawlers, um, or, you know, um, meta searches. Meta means that this search or this browser is going to allow you to look up, like, they'll be collecting or returning pages from main search engines that could be multiple search engines or true main search engines, including Google, Bing, Yahoo. So it will make its own decision and collect information from all of them and then bring it for you to look up. Basically, that's meta crawlers or meta search engines. More detailed information on how meta searches or how these are designed is found in the book, the one that I pointed to, uh, just the one that you looked up just now. Then we've got information portals. These are specialized search engines where you need to get a subscription for or do some sort of registration. like for businesses or small private companies, there is this information portal called LexisNexis. Then there are what is it? Corporates. I forgot the name. Uh, I don't know, maybe business corporates or something. So they're all information portals. They're just repositories of data or documents that are privately held, but you can get to them. Like I said, there could be a subscription, or you can buy each individual type of search reports. Open corporates, exactly. That's what it is. So you know about open corporates. That's an information portal. Then subscription databases of deep web. Deep web simply means that it is the type of web pages which are not indexed by the search engine, or they are not collected as um, indexed pages for the reason that intentionally the vendors or the owners of those databases, they don't want it to be something that is available publicly. So those are, the subscription databases within the deep web. And what is deep web is shown here in the chart. I would explain it to you, but the chart itself is self-explanatory, and I don't think that it would be as complex as people like to think. And a lot of times you get to read about deep web as having the information which is 95%, or they give like weird percentages, as if a majority of the web has pages inside of the deep web and they're not visible to you. So it appears that whatever search you do on the Google is only a minute portion of the whole. So to clarify that and to make it easy for you to understand that it is not that the deep web is necessarily is having that much higher percentage or volume of information, but rather it is something that you come across off and on, and you don't get to realize that there you are already in the deep web. Like anything that is a subscription based documents, or you have access to specialized databases which require an extraordinary effort to put the data together or put it in a more structured format. Only that, and that is the reason, and because of the cost of collection of all those, it makes it more of a premier data, and therefore it has a value which you are asked to pay for. So, those are considered deep web as well. So to say that it is not available or it is hidden, it doesn't mean that it is intentionally hidden from the user so that they are not discoverable. In fact, they are discoverable, but you need to actually go in there to subscribe to them, or you have to, you have to find a way to be able to get to that database for whatever reasons. It could be for marketing purposes, but the landing page would take you to at least those pages which would identify those sites with having the kind of database that you might be interested in, so you can register or subscribe. uh, so that's why it is called deep web. And then there is another dimension to the deep web which we call the dark web or the dark net. Basically that's where the person who is subscribing to, say, any website or any of the goods or services there in the dark web would remain anonymous, and whoever you are contacting to get that information, or to subscribe to those products and services, even that vendor is anonymous. So the both parties are anonymous, and in between there are servers, or there are proxies, or there are by design networks which are encrypted, and therefore they don't actually surface as if they are visible to the common public, but rather they work one-to-one with each other through a network that is running parallel as a system, which is also a kind of internet, but it has a at peculiar way of how they are they remain inconspicuous, or they're not easily accessible. However, there are tools and there are web browsers and there are temporary web browsers, so it's a lot of complication there, but truly speaking, we don't identify with darknet as much, or we don't promote that, and mainly because of illegal activities that happen in there. So there's not a whole lot of coverage on those topics in your course. But let's look at this chart. Okay. In this one, you could see that we have a demarcation or red line right here, which is separating something called visible web on the top. And then under this red line, there is a whole bunch of information about the deep web. And what we call deep web is it's itemized, and this is described here, but I will explain it to you in a minute. And the next red line, which is at the very bottom, under which we call there is information which you would say that does not exist, but it works with the government departments, intranets, and VPNs. Anything above this last red line, which is in the shaded area, we call the dark web. And this is what I'm referring to. Since dark web is part of the deep web, so we'd like to call the entire portion of dark web to be included in deep web. Starting from the top, what is visible, for instance, for the public viewing is news articles, free downloads. These are all listed here as examples, so I don't have to explain it. You can read what it says. This part, which is really visible in the sense that it is intentionally made visible for it to gather that kind of clientele, or get the interested parties to look it up, or something that is promoted. That's called common web, or layer zero, we call it as well. So common web on the top. And there is this shaded area, which is what we call surface web, layer one. Instead of, where you have layer zero, then you've got layer one, and then there is layer two, and layer three, and layer four. So in the common web, all this. In the surface web, what is surface web? Surface web is where you're given an option to make certain information private and other could be public info. So social media accounts are usually coming under the surface web or layer one. Okay. Here you might require the vendor would give you a portion of the portal to be navigated without any hindrance or without any restrictions, whereas there could be other portions which require for you to register and so on. So that is the surface web. Now, under the red line right here, there is a small portion, this blue area, slightly, I don't know if you can differentiate, this is slightly darker blue. It's called Burgess web or layer two. Why it's called Burgess web, I have no clue, but that's the term that's pretty much everywhere on the internet. So, bottom line, it's called layer two. What layer two does is that it allows for people like in the forum area, for instance, that they can create their own groups. And those groups would have certain information for which you can call them private group, and there could be a public group also. But mainly because it is layer two or Burgess web, you could say that it would create, or it would have the ability to build rooms that would not require moderators, and therefore it could be very private, or it could be semi-private. So these are, and some of these are not as legal, like BitTorrents. I don't know if you've heard of that, or where you can download or exchange ebooks or download softwares and share things which otherwise would be infringing the intellectual property. So that fall into layer 2. um, Under this layer 2, there is layer 3, which is straightforward, that you can see. One of them is medical records, for instance. So you need to have a special permission, or you need to be in a position where you can actually demand, request, or even work with medical records that is otherwise a private information. Research papers, other library databases, that is allowing you to get into environments with special permissions. So that is deep web. Deep web does not mean that you are totally excluded from accessing these. It's just sometimes you can call it privileged information. Other times it could be something that you have to act responsibly to be able to get to these. And for that reason, there are different requirements for accessing this data. Um, Generally, in the deep web pages, you are able to access to a certain level, or it would allow you or take you to the page where it would give you the option to be able to access those pages which otherwise are not indexed, but because it has a way for you to register with or to have access through a process, you would be asked to fulfill those requirements. There is VPNs. Virtual private networks include intranets. Intranets are connection or the permanent connection between points that transfer or transmit and receive privileged information through some sort of encryption, but they are within the environments that are closed, like banking, for instance. It's a closed environment, like had the connection between corporate offices and their branches. That's a secured and closed environment. Those are intranets. VPNs, usually now that we use this quite a bit, it is just allowing you to access certain servers again through the point-to-point connection, which is truly again an encrypted, except that it is not for security reasons, but for you to get out of certain location environment or certain go beyond geographic boundaries to be able to access those servers, which would open up the gateway or the internet or the World Wide Web for you, but not through the local servers, but rather through servers that are placed or physically are showing up with the IPs that belong to those countries which are outside of your domain or your own country or where you're searching from. So those are VPNs. Anonymous access browsers like DuckDuckGo, for example. Now, there is a lot of questions people ask about what is the difference between anonymity that is offered through DuckDuckGo, for example, versus Tor, Tor. It's called Onion Router. iQuicks, there is another browser that is claiming to be anonymous. So the differentiator between DuckDuckGo, for example, and Tor, I can give you that as a reference, and there could be others. So DuckDuckGo is a browser basically, and it's not really a true search engine. However, what it claims, or let's start with what is the reason for its existence. So DuckDuckGo is only a browser that would connect with the different search engines and bring information back to you so it can be displayed on its pages. The idea behind DuckDuckGo is for them to gather enough audience so that they can sell ads on those return pages, as if it is one of those popular browsers for which people are willing to pay a premium for their products and services to be displayed. So for marketing reason, that is number one. That's why they're there, and their selling point is that they claim that they are not collecting your behavioral information with how you're, or they're not collecting the history of your searches. So basically, in a way, they're saying that just because they're not collecting your data, they are making you anonymous. But that is not the true fact. The fact is that they would not make your search or your, let's say, your visibility totally anonymous to those that are looking to identify or find who has done these searches. So basically, they are tracking your IP addresses, but they're not collecting your information. So that is to the extent where you could say that they are anonymous, but not as much as Tor, for instance, the onion router, TOR, we call it, that is exclusively used to make both parties anonymous, meaning that the vendor that you are connecting with or the website you're going to through Tor, those vendors or those targeted web pages or who they belong to are not disclosed. And at the same time, the user's identity is also not disclosed. So both parties are anonymous. So this is the difference between Tor and DuckDuckGo. Then we've got the dark web right here, which is layer 4. And as I said, we are not getting too much deeper into how the dark web works. But if you have a question on dark web, I'd be happy to answer it. I've worked in this zone and looked up and worked with ways in which we can decipher some of the layers of deep of the dark web. So I might be able to answer a few questions if you have anything to talk about in this area. Usually, some students are more interested in this and they do ask. So it's up to you. But anyway, so the Burgess web, the VPN, the dark web. So that's as much as we'd like to know about the deep web. Um, okay, then we'll go to browser tools, meaning that remember when we covered the topic for the for us to um, look at the implied context that the search engine imposes to your search queries. And we talked about the internet filter bubble. That's what this is going to explain. So knowing that we do have an understanding of what internet filter bubble is, I can just repeat it quickly. Two regions, say region 1 and 2, where Alex and Corey, both different geographic zones, are doing the search using exactly same browser and using, putting in the same search query, but both are getting different search results. And that's because of the implied context, which is in addition to your explicit context that you give to your search, or the way you have phrased your search, exactly the same, but the results are not showing up as equal or as they're supposed to on both sides. Both are getting different results. So that is where you are set inside of a bubble, which you can't get out of. Usually, there is this bias that is difficult to shake it off when you're doing those searches. So, what is it that you can do to overcome that situation? Something that you can do with the browser could be helpful. Like you can look up the privacy of it. And within privacy, there are different layers of privacy. Anonymity could be an option depending on the browser. To what extent it can make you anonymous with something that keeps changing, and Google is master on that. Every time you go there would be something that they'll be experimenting with, or depending on how the legal side is reacting, they might just make some changes there in their policies. Security could be another area. We are looking at these bullet points only because these are some of the ways in which you can identify and cover all the grounds that the browser allows for you to tweak and change, and gives you some options to work on. So you can work with security, anonymity, privacy areas, global reach. It has to do with the language, it has to do with your location, local reach that you can emphasize on. So you can, basically just make it more localized. There could be an option there. Overcome language barrier, uncover non-index web pages. So if you have to uncover non-index web pages, meaning that you are going to go deep and basically get into the deep web, you can do that also. Except that a lot of times what I do is that whenever I'm using anything to do with exploratory search, or something that is more specific to the searches outside of my geographic area of search, I would be neutralizing the browser, or I would not be using my personalized browser, and I would open up or open an account, or additional browsers may be used, which is not going to bring any of my history or have impact on the search results, only because it has a collection of information on me from before. So I would, for searches, I would use another account. That's all that I can explain to you right now as far as adjustments, because we have not covered a whole lot of ground on what could be the changes you can make in these areas. But it is a suggestion for anyone who is interested to neutralize or change settings for the browsers, which eventually, has an impact on your search results, and you're finding out that it's not doing the job correctly. Then these are the areas you should be covering and looking up for making changes in your browsers. Okay, we don't need this information. Next is the internet research challenges. So let's take a short break here. I'll take 10 minutes. And then when I come back, I'll finish up these. This is going to be a lot of theoretical areas, and I cannot actually gauge how much time it would take me to cover all of it. So we might be over time limit. And if that happens, then please let me know if you have to go. You can just leave me a note and leave, and I'll still continue so that I can finish what I'm supposed to. We're coming very close to about, finishing up the number of classes that are left over. Not many. So it also means that we have to compress the time, or we have to extend the time. So whatever it takes, we have to finish everything, and that means, as I said, so it could be slightly over the limit of when we normally finish the class. So I'm going to take a 10 minutes now, and then I'll see you in a little bit. Eh? Okay, Tristan, I'm back. If you're there, you can hear me. You can just give me a nod, put in the chat. You can hear me okay, and you can see my screen. I'm going to continue now. All good to go. All right, thank you. Okay, let's look at some of the internet research challenges that we should be aware of as researchers. Reason being that we need to be understanding the limitations that are there. And we call them challenges is because we have to look at these points that is basically is explaining, or in short, I guess, short statements. It's giving us an idea of where we need to be careful to filter out anything that is irrelevant. Some of the barriers that are going to be there all the time. Multicultural and language barriers, for instance. We have to be aware of what could be the sensitivities, the socio-economic situations that would prevent or would actually censor some of the information. There is all these issues which are listed. We can't go through each one of them, but just to give you an idea and how it is explained, like easy and fast information. So, because there is a lot of info and you are in a hurry, you have to be careful to assess the utility of it and the authority of those pages. You have to be aware of that. Selection of specialized search engines you have to do to target your more filtered searches. Um, Information timelines, sometimes you need to create what we call the information traps, or something that is bringing the up-to-date information, because that's what your research entails. um, that is covered under information timelines. um, Cyber vandalism, intentional misrepresentation of something, because the marketers right now has really compromised the data integrity and the information that apparently appears to be genuine, but there could be advertorials that you couldn't tell if they're genuine information or they're leading you to certain ideas that you may not agree with, or you're forced to agree with them because they're intentional misinformation. Corporate advertisements, tabloids, religious beliefs, these are all biased information. Political material, you have to understand, when it is political or some issues that are sensitive politically, from coming from North American side, or from, the West versus the East, or, different ways in which they interpret information or present that. News media, propaganda groups, all of these need to be kept in mind. So just because it is a list that I am presenting to you, there is more details. You can read it in the book. But these are some of the points that might be something that you will have to consider just by reading. As I said, through the captions or the statements here, you can tell what it probably would mean. um, Social media and information sabotage, for instance, ghostwriters on internet forums that are not real people, but they're marketing companies. They have multiple accounts, or they can just create a momentum or create that kind of volume to bring up a chatter of some sort, or create a lot of movement in content. So those ghost writers are basically not really a specialist or genuine people, but they may have some pseudonames or other accounts or multiple accounts that they're working with, and so on and so forth. So you have to be able to filter through all of these. Okay. Um, Sources of information. Now, this is more important because eventually, when we are talking about information sourcing, we are talking really about collection of data. So, what are the different types of data? And once we understand their types, we would know the value or the type of effort that you have to make those data available to you. Some sort of data is what we call the primary information source, or the main information that is coming directly from the source itself. So that's called primary data or primary information source. These could be, for instance, documents that are coming firsthand, or that are, genuine work from someone, or there could be surveys with interacting with the real people. That is first-hand information or primary information. Okay. These are examples of some of them. The original documents like diaries, speeches, manuscripts, letters, interviews, original and creative work like patent, copyrighted uh, information, music, artwork, and so on. So this is just giving you the information about the data which cannot be challenged, or something for which you could definitely make assumption that it is, since it is coming from the direct source, so it is more reliable data as well as more valuable data. And sometimes you can say that it is more difficult to collect, or if it is not difficult, then it is voluminous, and it takes a lot more time out of your effort to collect it directly from somewhere. Okay. Then you've got secondary information sources, which is not direct but indirect, that can be either vouched, verified, or vetted. Or you could say that it is something that you can rely on because of time strains. You have only few options, and some of these information sources are coming from books, government publications, reports, newspapers. And don't get me wrong, when we say secondary, there could be genuine information or maybe information which is actually collected or compiled by third party. But because you are relying on, say, things like government publications, you have to assume a certain level of certainty or certain level of belief that it is coming or it is collected through genuine efforts and from real sources. So even news articles, stories, even though they are collected or to depending on where it's coming from and who the author is, the reliability factor will always depend on to what extent you want it to be vetted or checked or verified, right? Academic papers, magazines, journals, blogs, etc. So these are secondary sources, and then there are tertiary sources also. But I'd say that for the way in which we present our reports or researches through data collection, we'd like to stick to primary and secondary data only. Different forms of information. Well, there is formats and forms in which information can be separated or identified with, depending on the scope of your research, depending on what the client needs are, the sensitivity of the reports, as well as the utility of it, like who is going to utilize it. And it is best covered under the scope of your research, and it is identified when the scope also is specific about whether certain data has to be coming from a primary source or a secondary source. And if your research is the kind that requires analytics as well, then you have to go beyond just the data collection, because now you have to work on that data. And then there would be other factors and facts which will separate primary or secondary data into qualitative data and the quantitative data. And that is what we are going to talk about next. So the type of information, background information, see, all that is listed here, 1 through 10, it could be a combination of these, or it could be, some of these different types of info. We call them types is because we need to understand that the scope of your research will obviously identify the objective, and the objective would give you an idea of how would you separate the sources of information, as a part being background, a part being in-depth, like certain topics or certain areas within the topics would require in-depth information versus quick facts, because because they are blended together sometimes. In fact, most of the times in the research report, we would say that it is going to be a whole lot of mix of all these different formats of or types of info collection. So there is background info when you have to give some perspective or give a little bit of understanding of where something is coming from, or what could be the background of the research. That would actually help for whoever is reading the research report to understand like I said, the perspective or the need for having some sort of background information. Sometimes the background information can be in depth as well. So in-depth info is more detailed, and it requires a bit of a due diligence, as well as collecting information from different sources. And then there are quick facts for reviews. So those facts have to be coming from reliable source. It does not have to be primary, but it could be secondary sources, except that depending on the level of validity of the data that would have an impact on research outcomes, you will have to give it a weightage to what extent you have to verify it. Real-time information, sometimes it is an evolving story or something that is happening, events on the ground, and you need most current information, especially in news. Then you need real-time information, information discovery. That is when you're doing some investigations. It's a background checks of something. So that is information discovery, that is post facts or after the fact, but you need to investigate further based on the information you are getting, or what little you have. You may want to change the direction of it in onto the investigative side, which means facts that is difficult to find and you have to do more investigations. Then there is knowledge discovery, which means new information, something that is built on top of the existing information. Trends and predictions could be the outcome of it. And because of that, trend and prediction, especially collecting information from social media, would give you an idea of projections, or giving an indication of future prospects of something to happen or not to happen. Then you've got big data info, which means that it is the data that is floating all over, except that there is no fixed relationship made between them, or mechanically they're not connected, but it appears separate and segregated, and you have to collect all of it to make some relationship or build relationship from it. And once you build the relationship, it becomes structured. But as long as it is raw data, or data that is spread all across, and it has a value only when you connect it together, that becomes unstructured raw data. Big data is the example of that. Then we've got gathered analytical or statistical data, which is to do with collection of polls, surveys, census, statistics, and so on. Virtual groups or community is another way of collecting info. And virtual groups or community means that to explain it more with more clarity, we are talking about communities which talk to each other, and they have common interest, or they have some sort of homogeneity, which revolves around certain topic or subject of interest, and you are gathering information from that murmur or that interaction. Then we've got news blogs. These are mostly personal ideas or general ideas, or professional input of something that is gathered and put together in a format that could be in the shape of news articles, blogs, reviews, opinions, and so on. So these are, some of the blends of info, which is what we have separated or grouped as different forms of information. Okay. After you've collected the info, depending on, like I said, again, everything revolves around the scope of your research, objective of your research, and the expectation of interpretation of that information from you as a researcher. So, in order for you to achieve all of that, you have to be able to differentiate between primary and secondary. Primary is not difficult to verify, but if it is secondary or tertiary information, which has some references that you need to verify, or you need to connect it with the validity of that information, you are talking about reliability factors. Authors verification is important. Now, within authors verification, you have to look for things like if the author is genuinely a professional or is specialized in that specific subject, or whether that author is well known in the community as a as someone who understands the subject matter, and so on and so forth. Then purpose of information in review. You have to look at whether the reliability or the way in which the information is put together is objective enough, or it is serving the purpose of the research. Because a lot of times it's very hard when you have all these mechanical parts, I would say, which is to connect the information together so that it remains focused. That is very important, and you have to see if the material is is complete, it has the data integrity attached to it, which is verifiable, and if it is purposeful. So, purpose of information in review, information objectivity, evaluation, whether that data is going to lead you to achieve the objective of your research at all times, and therefore everything requires reliability. If the reliability level is very high set by the client because there is a heavy dependency on this research, and it is going to be vetted at different levels, at different stages of your research, then you have to rely more on primary and secondary data has to be all the time evaluated. Accuracy of information, reliability and credibility, currency of time, and verification of links if it is the internet related. So, you have to look at the citations or cross references and verify from not one source but definitely different sources, just to make sure that it is reliable. So 1 through 7 are some of the attributes that could be explained even more in the book. But generally, in from for the sake of your exams, I would say that if you can just look at all these as if each of these statements or each of these points ring a bell. And when the question comes, you know that all these could be the factors, just to at least have enough knowledge that you remember there are at least 7 reliability factors would be sufficient for you. Okay. Planning scope and okay, so planning area. Planning will depend on how well the scope of the project is defined. Sometimes it is broad scope, other times broad means that it is to be explored more, or the topic is such that it requires a lot more collection of information to build on a knowledge that is existing knowledge. So that makes it broad search. And if it is more filtered, exact, precise, depending on if the scope is detailed enough, then it could be, more focused scope or more detailed scope. So broad scope is more open, and more detail is less detailed, and depending on how it is set, or if it is defining the quality of data, the objective includes type of analytics or type of research required, is itemized in more detail, you will have more filtered or more focused search and less time it would take, right? Planning area. So project scope assessments, information sourcing, very important. If in the planning stages, you are not able to pinpoint where you're going to collect the information from, and therefore may not be able to uh, let or agree with the client as to what type of information sourcing you're going to use, you will land into problems. Two reasons. One is the cost would just scale, and second is the resources. You may have limited resources, so the time will become longer. And of course, the third is the utility of this information. If it is to be used for making decisions, or let's say if the research is such that the shareholders are depending on your report to figure out the feasibility or the future assessment or the viability of their shareholder shares valuation, then of course you have to be more attentive, and you have to be more concerned about figuring out where the information is going to be available and if it is reliable enough. um, and therefore information sourcing is important. Data collection, data types, and sampling of data. So in the planning stages, data collection methods, there are methods which are well known in this industry, or they're industry wide accepted as having a value, or understanding that your research would have these methods explained so that it can be understood, okay, industry wide, not just by you, but it can be considered as accepted methods within the research industry. Then you've got data types that needs to be separated, like whether it is qualitative data or quantitative. I'll talk about quantitative and qualitative later, but well, I can quickly give you an idea. Quantitative data is in numbers, or something that can easily be identified and be manipulated as numbers. And therefore, you can do a lot of analytics because it is actually easy to analyze. Whereas the qualitative data is something which is not easy to translate into numbers, and it could be sentiments, it could be preferences, it could be the kind of information for which you would have likes, dislikes, reviews, opinions, things of that sort, which is sometimes not easy to translate into numbers. So data types is important if it is qualitative or quantitative. Sampling of data, because you cannot handle everything that is in the population for you to work with, and therefore you need to take a sample which would be acceptable sample, or the method of sampling is acceptable industry wise, because there is sampling methods also, and that are also kind of well defined, or they're well known in the industry. So we have to work with the sampling methods to justify, and to be able to defend the notion that you have not been biased in collecting those samples. Okay. Then we've got data analysis. So there could be qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. So there are methods and techniques there. All these are to be assessed in the planning stages. Why? Because anytime there is an exchange of documents between those that are giving you the research assignment, and you as a researcher has to go back and tell the client that this is how you're going to progress, or if it is the methods and methodologies that are mutually agreeable, so that you can work together without any hindrance, or without having to get into any kind of disputes. You need to iron out all these different ways in which the industry acceptable methods and methodologies have to be adopted. Then you've got information reliability, quality, and risks. So reliability is only going to come when you have agreed to the sources of data as being primary and secondary, uh, and there is a method to which for which the client agrees that it is going to be an acceptable information source. The quality of data versus reliability. The quality is directly proportionate to the reliability. If it is reliable, then it is of good quality. And quality also means your sources have to be something that, or the collection of your data sources are going to be heavily dependent on primary data, which is not disputable. And then, of course, there could be a risk assessment, to what extent certain data can be reliable, and to what extent you can actually obtain directly, because there could be information sources which cannot, because of there is a lot of effort required in collecting certain type of information. So you have to rely on third party already collected information resources. That takes years to collect that sort of data, and for you to go back and do it on your own would be difficult. So you have to rely on third party, and depending on how reliable that third party source is, will also identify the risks of that data. Okay. Then we've got research, results, interpretation, and reporting. This could be planned, but a lot of times the research would not required for you to do or to come up with conclusions. So it just becomes collection of information and the analytics that you do, and depending on your scope as well, there could be some limitations to how much you can interpret out of it um, as a result of your research. And normally you leave it to the client to do the interpretations. But occasionally, if you are a professional and your professional opinion is required, only then you would do the interpretations and conclusions. So this is the planning area. Then we've got research work assessment and approach. Um, these are just different points that you have to um, yeah, you have to just go through each one of them to just use it as a checklist rather. Like the client's perspective is most important for the work assessment. Work assessment and approach means that your work is now getting audited, and you are supposed to cover all these points in order for you to come out successful in delivering and acceptable research reports. Client's perspective has to be mutual. That's most important. Um, Mutual in the sense that clients, you at all times you have to keep focused on the objective, or whether your research is maintaining the objectivity and the purpose of your research is covered. So client's perspective is important because what happens usually is that you are always in a dialogue with the client. You are always trying to refocus or readjust with what the client's requirements are. Because a lot of times you have to go back and forth in the sense in which I'm using the client's perspective as two words is because you are definitely going to make some changes depending on how the client is looking at the way in which you are doing your research work, because you're all the time have the milestones you're covering. All of a sudden clients comes in and says you have to make such and such changes, or your direction, you may want to go in this area, this is of more of an interest to us, even though it may not be defined in the scope entirely. But if you are in dialogue with the client, you're always making those changes depending on what the client perspective is. So you are getting some sort of a nod or something from the client that tells you if you're in the right direction. Then scoping the research work. If when you're scoping it for your own self to do your, because scope one that is coming from the client versus the scope that you're interpreting for yourself or for your staff to work with uh, can be a little bit that requires a lot of clarity. So that needs to be done. Defining a research topic, the research topic has to be defined enough that it is actually identifying the problem that needs to be resolved, or the hypothesis has to be identified. Research problem, again, same thing. Identifying the primary audience, where this report is going to be going, whether it's going to be for public or for the management or the shareholders or the vendors or the clients or the sorry financiers, like banks and those kind of interest groups. Identify information types and sources. So, you know, so types and sources, which we have covered already. So information types, there were like 9, 10 of them. The sources, whether they're primary, secondary, you're going to do polls, or you're going to do surveys, going to do focus groups. Information needs of research project, information delivery mediums, whether it's going to be a research report, full-blown research report, or it's going to be a research of facts or verifying some existing information. And of course, print medium and digitized information. Print medium, you cannot change much, so you have to be careful. It needs to be acknowledged, verified, and there is a process to it because you can't make changes later on, or it is more digitized, which can be changed later. So that kind of stuff. Then we've got scoping. The research scope can be broadly defined or it could be narrowly defined. As I explained to you, if it's broad, there is, scope is probably not as detailed. If it is narrowly defined, it is more focused. It says, identifies more specific questions or set of questions, can gather more targeted information on topics, of course. So these are the strengths and limitations. It's just logical. Limitations, of course, if it is very focused and it is more detailed in terms of how scope is identified, then your limitation would be too narrow defined can end up with little or inadequate information. So you don't use a lot of your mind to create ideas or, if it is, so those could be the limitations. Again, broadly defined limitations, it's time consuming, it's more expensive, ambiguous, and makes it difficult to pinpoint exactly information needed to you. There's a lot of back and forth with the client. So this is the strength and weaknesses between broadly defined research scope and narrowly defined research scope. I'm just going through this bit quicker than I usually do, but because we have to cover a lot of ground here in these chapters, so I have to go a little bit fast. Now we're going to talk about data. What is data? What are data collection methods? What is the data value for research purposes? So three questions. Data by itself refers to concisely stated facts. When data is processed, organized, interpreted, or presented in a structured format to give it a context or meaning, it is called information, which means that any data itself is a piece of information. It could be a single piece of information or collection of different data or different pieces of info, except that unless they have a relationship with each other and they are in a structured format, they will not be considered information, but rather data sets which can later be put together so that eventually it becomes an information that is giving an idea or is conveying some sort of results out of its combination or connection with each other. So that makes it an information. Otherwise, it's just pieces or separated data units. Data collection methods are different ways in which you collect the qualitative and quantitative information. Usually, it is a mix of both, depending on the research topic. But in my personal opinion, as well as my experience, says that it is always a combination of two types of data, qualitative and quantitative, depending on the situation and the type of method you have used for data collection. For instance, if you are doing, let's say, focus groups, or if you're doing, let's say, sentiment analysis, trend analysis, opinions, those kind of information is sometimes is coming from surveys. So that is a data collection method. It's coming from focus groups. It is coming from virtual groups. It's coming from interviews. It is coming from social experiments. Those are, qualitative in a lot of cases. And similarly, there could be a quantitative aspect attached to it. Like if it is definitive answers in a survey, yes or no, one is yes, two is no, then one and two are units that are easy to work with because now it is numeric. So any type of data collection method you're using, two types of data sets usually interact or work together, and it covers different aspects of data. Okay. What is the data value? The value of the data is also very important, depending on scope and what you have agreed with the client, your primary and secondary sources. You will have to verify it as vetted, identified as reliable or not, and so on. So the value or the weightage given to data will depend on its reliability, its relevancy, its accuracy, whether it's current or old, or it is, something that is in future, but it is current enough that you can say that it is has got a more value or a higher weightage given to it. It is purposeful. That means it is fulfilling the objective. So 5 and 6 together, purposeful and objective, is important. All of these factors, 1 through 5, are going to give a higher weightage or a value to the data, and therefore, mostly you should be striving to complete or to check mark 1 through 6 as attributes that gives a real value to the data. Now, in the data area, you can see that we have these numbers on top of the boxes in red color. One is data types, then there is two is data collection methods. And within data collection methods, you've given a number 2.1, so you know that it is attached to 2 because the number remains intact, like 2 is the main idea, and this is the subset of the main idea data collection, which is shown 1 through 6 in this box. So it becomes 2.1. So in the sense of how it is utilized here, you could see that data collections can be observations, surveys and polls, interviews, focus groups, document studies, and case studies. And that's how we are going to be moving into the different types of data collection methods and looking at these numbers to follow them as if they're the top layer and then subsets of the top layer. So in this one, data types, one is going to be separated into 1.1 and 1.2. Data types are qualitative and quantitative. Within quantitative, these are the two methods, 1.1.1. And for 1.2, being a subset of 1, would have additional um, um, set distributed as 1.2.1 within this box. So qualitative can be binary, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio data. And so this is how we are going to move to give you. And by the way, this chart and these numbers are just giving you the relationships based on the number and their subsets, main number being, on the left-hand side, and what is coming after decimal is a subset of the whole, which is 2, and this is 1 over here. And that's just for the reference. That this is not how we're going to run all the slides or to explain it just from this slide. We will cover it through individual boxes and see what is going to come next. So this is just a reference that you will keep for yourself to navigate through it. But let's look at the data types and data collections first. Okay. So, and by the way, this is data collection. So this is what we are going to do. And then we are going to discuss data types and data collections. So data types and data collections, mixed method approach. Okay. So the qualitative and quantitative data techniques is used today. This is just a statement, or you could say a bit of a definition to tell you what is a mixed method. A mixed method of data collection means that you would have a data source that would cover the quantitative data and qualitative data together in the same survey or in the same data collection source. So when both are together, and normally they're called mixed method. Okay. Sometimes you also create a data management plan. This is not in the scope of our topics that we are covering, but if you need to learn more, then you can actually look up data management plan, and which is where there is a method to how you can create that plan. There is a chart and there is a more on this topic. However, we will just stick to quantitative and qualitative data right now and work with and identify it separately. So qualitative data, by definition, it is qualitative is non-numerical data, okay, or cannot be quantified. Example is important for you to know. Personal observations, for instance, emotions, sentiments, interviews, opinions, and suggestions. In quantitative, it's simply numbers. Examples are your height, your shoe sizes, anything that is measurable in numbers, even in fractions. So there is qualitative and quantitative. In quantitative data, now we are looking at what are the different types of quantitative data. Normally, there are several different kinds which would be more detailed. And for someone who is into data sciences, they would know that there is so many more flavors to it. But as a researcher that will stick to collection of information only through internet, you might want to just know these types or the main types. It's about enough information for you to use in your research plans, and would also be the naming or the jargon that we are using that is understood industry wide. So it is a language situation with the research projects which would help you uh, to identify with or to write these wordings or use these terminologies um, for the purposes of professional reporting. Okay. So we will talk about quantitative data types first. Okay. Generally, there are two types in quantitative data. Quantitative is numerical. There is continuous data and there is discrete data. Okay, continuous data means that it is accurate to the decimal point. Means that it does not have to be whole numbers, but it could be numbers in fractions. So that is called continuous data, and continuous data has the ability, or it has a way of how these numbers are interpreted or used, especially when you're running softwares which do the analytics automatically. These days, you don't necessarily need to do it manually. There are these software, specialized softwares that would ask you questions like whether the data is continuous or it is discrete. And if you don't know the meaning of it, you'll definitely go to Google and find out. So that's the reason why you should first of all have these understandings of when the applications are looking for or asking you to identify it as continuous or discrete. You know what it means. So if it is continuous data, it is something like taking it with the examples is easier for you to understand. So if the driver is completing the fastest lap of the race, winning by 1 meters in 12.34 seconds, this means that 1 meter with 12.34 seconds means that now you're talking about continuous data. Continuous data can be divided and reduced to finer and finer levels. For example, you can measure the height of your kids at progressively more precise scales, meters, centimeters. So it could be 1 meter, so many centimeters, and so many millimeters. So all of these are more on the precision level. Then you've got discrete data, which means that it is not divisible by any number, or it cannot be in fractions. So it has to be a whole number. One is for yes, two is for no. One is for great, two is for not so good, three is for bad, and so on. So all these numbers, which are whole numbers, for example, kids cannot be 1.5 kids. The You have to identify discrete data uh, separately from the continuous data for you to do analytics. This is the presumption, unless you're doing 3D modeling, which would take both continuous and discrete data. So let's say discrete is the one which cannot be divided into fractions, and continuous is more precise and can use fractions as well as combination of whole numbers with fractional numbers, as long as it is giving an accuracy to the last digit, or mathematically it is more precise. So that is continuous and discrete data. I don't think you have to worry about this chart, but let's just suppose that this is something that you should get back to once you understand binary, nominal, ordinal, and all these. So this chart would not have a meaning for you unless we discuss all of these. And now we are talking about qualitative data sites. Qualitative is like I told you, sentiments, trends, emotions, things of that sort. You like in the scale of 10, 1 is good, 5 is mediocre, let's say 10 is the best, and so on. So that's qualitative. Let's look at binary, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, which is the different types similar to when we talked about quantitative. Qualitative have types as well. So these are different ones that we'll talk about. And there are 9 of them, but here we are going to do only 5. Okay. Binary data means it's relational, meaning that it has to have an other data that works with it, or there has to be two numbers or two values that you have to allocate, um, which makes it binary. Binary means two. So single data is irrelevant. It does not have a place in analytics. The only reason why single data would exist if it is used and with reference to deviation, which means that if it is a standard, then any other data around it would be considered as a deviation or something that is with relationship to that one single digit. But so that is that is not binary. Here the binary data in qualitative sense means it is either right or wrong, it is true or false, accept or reject. So this is, basically two variables. So that is qualitative. When we are talking qualitative, look, we have not used one is right or two is wrong. We have used the words right or wrong, true or false, accept or reject. Okay. And this is easier to work with because with two variables, it's not difficult. It becomes more difficult when you have a lot more of data, which is what we are going to discuss. These are then we have got nominal data. The color of smartphones can be considered as a nominal data types as we can't compare one color with others. See, when you have a situation where one variable is unique enough that it cannot be duplicated as if it is given a different attribute or it can be allotted a different number. For example, if there are 3 red pens, then the fact that they are red all together, like all 3 of them are red, we cannot consider them as 3 red pens. In fact, the unordered data means that the pen color is unique enough that it is only going to be considering red as a unique color, blue as another color, and so on. So it is not possible to state that red is greater than blue. This is the end result of it, meaning that we cannot give one color a higher value than compared to the other color because each one is unique enough. So red is greater than blue is not possible. Therefore, it is unordered data, or it is called also nominal data in qualitative data terms, and therefore it could be a problem. And this is identified as qualitative issue, and there is a way that we are going to be able to use these values later on when we do analytics. But first we understand that this is called unordered data or nominal data. Another example, the gender of a person is another one where we can differentiate between male and female or others. Male is unique enough, female is unique enough. So it cannot be that male is more valuable than female, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is nominal data. Um, Another example of nominal data is, for example, if male is equal to 1 and female is equal to 2, still 1 or 2 would only give a value that is differentiating between male and female, but it would not identify it with what is greater, better, or anything that is a differentiator in terms of value given to these male or female. Okay. Um, Another example, you have brown hair or brown eyes, you are American, your name. Okay, so here is an example of a questionnaire. If it is a qualitative data, which is unordered data, what color hair do you have? Brown, blonde, black, rainbow. All of these are, the kind of unique attributes which would not give which would not make blonde better than brown or black better than, because they're unique to an individual, yet they are not given a value which can be translated into numbers. Okay, so they're unique enough. So this is another example. Now talk about ordinal data or ordered data. Ordered data is something that can create a relationship in terms of what is better, greater, less, or more. Yet these are unique values. For instance, um, in the order of small, small is less than medium, and medium is less than large, depending on what relationship you're creating. Or you could say medium is less than large, or equal to something. But this is this relationship that you are able to create, as in sizes, for example, even though they are not numbered, but they're given the name like small, medium, and large, but they can create a relationship even though they are unique in itself. This is called ordered data or ordinal data, and therefore easier for us to work some sort of relationship because it is now ordered ordinal data, even though it is qualitative in nature. Okay. Um, So if there is a question that is of qualitative nature, you could phrase it like this. How likely are you to recommend our services to your friends, for example? It says very likely, likely, neutral, unlikely, very unlikely. And it is given a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in a certain situation, you could say that so many people answered likely, so many people answered unlikely, and therefore you are able to create relationship only because it's now an ordinal data. Okay. Okay. Then we will talk about, I think I'm going too fast, eh? How is it working out for you, Tristan? Are you following? Is it okay? Too much information or too fast for me to be moving uh, quicker than I'm used to? All good, eh? So, Tristan, do you do research work? Are you familiar with what we are talking about? Have you had the opportunity to go through or have some hands-on with the data analytics, I'd say, just out of curiosity. Okay. So you heard of interval data, ordinal, nominal data, and things like this, or it's just the qualitative and quantitative analytics analysis that you're familiar with, like as a term? I think it's more like a refresher for you. Okay. All right, good enough. So at least I know that it would just somehow ring a bell when we go through this, even if I'm going at a faster pace, you are able to catch on with it. So that's the reason I asked this question. So in now that we got finished with qualitative data types, I'm going to introduce some of the quantitative data types as well. One of the types is called interval data. Okay. Interval data is another way of how you would be collecting information in terms of numbers in certain situations. For example, when certain numbers are not sufficient as a single event, and you need multiple numbers and group them together to come up with the average score. Okay. And that is time based, like at one point or at one time or at one interval, this number was collected. In the second interval, another number, and so it continues. And you know that or five of these intervals or four of these group of numbers would be sufficient or would give you an idea which turns into um, a more affirmative interpretation of something. And these multiple numbers are called interval data because they are held at different intervals, and then they're grouped together. Example is Olympics judging scores. Like, for instance, if I think it is a swimming event, you could see that, or it is diving event, you could see that data for, let's say, one individual would be 6.0 at one point, at another, let's say, mm, and the next go, the same person got a number 6.5. Where is it? It's my cursor. I should change it to, my pointer should be um, like this. Now you can, it's more visible. You could see it says 6.0, then you've got another interval in between, and you've got another score 6.5 for the same person. Then the same person got 7.0 and 7.5. So all of these put together would give a general idea of whether to consider all of these together or group them together to come up with a result of some sort. So that is interval data. Let's see. Why is it not moving? Okay, there. Then we've got ratio data. Ratio is how many times one number is different from the one that is considered or marked as a standard. For instance, 40 points has twice the value of scoring 20. So the ratio would be 40 is to 20, or 40 with a colon sign, and you put number 20. And it gives a ratio between two numbers as one number having the relationship, which can be twice or thrice or four times or five times, depending on what that ratio to that standard number is. So if the standard number is 20 points, 40 would be twice as much. And therefore, that is the ratio data. Not difficult to understand. We do that quite a lot. And this could be another flavor to what the quantitative data might look like. Okay, so we just did, nominal, ordinal, and interval, and, ratio. So that's about as much. This is to give you an idea, not to get into the details of how the analytics is going to be done with these numbers, but the all-round idea is to bring back that memory, especially for those who have been in research, to know that these are the kind of important one, and gives a general idea of having an understanding of what the standard methods in the traditional researches are. Okay. Now, data collection methods. Now we're talking about methods, and methods means that we'd be looking at least six of these right now, but it could entail, or it could include collection through a collection of qualitative as well as quantitative data. Okay. So mixed method rather. But right now, we're just looking at the data collection methodologies, or different ways in which we collect those, two different types. Observation techniques. In observations, I would say the more chances of you getting qualitative nature of data. So your survey questionnaire would be slightly different, more inclined towards getting the qualitative perspective. But it depends, it more or less depends on the scope, as well as the objective of your research and the scenario you're creating. So observations would not only be one method, but there is another methodology that is attached to it, which tells you how to record those observations. That is a process of how to collect it. This is a method. Observation is a method, and then there is a process or a way in which you collect that. Okay, so that's going to be different. Observation techniques. Observation is mostly to do with your personal way of how you interpret certain events, or it could be something that is what we call empirical research, or there could be ethnographies and other ways. which is more of a dimension that allows you to embed yourself in some sort of situation that could take more time over a period of your research to actually collect that information, and that information starts from a basic question and that evolves with time as the surroundings or situation change, and you adopt to those situations to collect more out of it. And so the research is more long term, so that is ethnography and empirical research, and mostly to do with observation techniques. Social experiments are one example. Okay, and then there are students of sociology that actually use observation techniques as well. Then you've got surveys and polls, which is more or so black and white, and there are there is a differentiation in surveys and polls depending. Um, well, first of all, the nature of polls is such that it is not a very detailed, lengthy questions. It is more of a single question which is powerful enough, or it conveys an idea or gives some sort of opportunity for for the outsiders or those that are tending to the polls to um, answer quickly without having to go into any detail. So the idea of that polls is to gather quick information, more impulsive sometimes information, and sometimes politically it is more viable to collect quick information due to the time strain, as well as sometimes it's a sensitivity of the topics that don't allow you to go in more details. Then compared to that, if you look at surveys, surveys are more detailed, they're more organized, they're more scientific. They have a method to it. There is specialization in just creating survey questions. There is legalities also involved in building survey questions, depending on where that survey is going. Your audience that are involved in the surveys have to be what you call legally involved. So there is this what you there is some documentation. We'll discuss that later. So surveys are more detailed. Okay. um, and then you've got interviews. Interviews is another method depending on the research. If it's observation techniques versus interviews, you could say that interviews are more personal or interpersonal, and observations are something which may not involve the subject or the knowledge about for the subject on whether or not they are actually part of the observation may not be necessary. But in interviews, you are openly discussing something with your audience or with the participants. Uh, in the interviews, the common objective has to be understood for those that are taking the interview and those that are giving the interview. So interviews are more personal. And like I said, depending on the type or nature of the survey or the research, if it is a sensitive subject or subjects that people are reluctant to talk about otherwise or find difficult to answer in survey questions, they might be able to open up a bit more after the level of trust is established between the participants who are there as interviewee and the interviewer. Both have to have that relationship. And the topic, like I said, will also tell you what type of data collection method you would use. Focus groups, more or so, there could be two types of focus group. One is where you want to have a group that has a commonality of um, commonality of understanding a subject matter that mutually can be discussed because of the common grounds the participants have in the focus group. Other times it could be contradiction or two opposite sides that are debating something. So that could be a focus group also. But it strictly requires a mediator. That could be an additional person who is the third party sitting with those that are the actual researcher or the observer or those who are heading the focus group. Uh, so that there is a third party that would also make sure that there is no bias, and the focus group is maintaining, the objectivity of of the discussion. You've got document studies, which is really what we do when we do our research, is that we dig into documents, we dig into material that we collect from different sources and put it together, which is more involving independent research without the necessity of having to have anybody else participate in it. So you could be yourself or in a group as a team looking for and collecting information sources. So that is document studies. Case study is when you have a situation that you assume, or situation that is a real situation, or real kind of scenario on the ground, that you will simulate in order for you to achieve some results as case study, or as a real events happening that would give you ideas or give you about enough information based on the reaction, the eventuality, the outcome of that. So those could be case studies. These are all data collection methods. Generally, we'd like to attribute more to the qualitative side, but quantitative is also involved. However, the qualitative aspect prevails a lot more in observation, in interviews, sometimes in surveys, and so on. So that's what we would differentiate or cover for data collection methods. Next thing, we are supposed to be doing the sampling methods. It's a totally different, it's another subject, and therefore it requires another class for me to, at least I was able to cover on target things that I wanted to finish today. So I'm quite satisfied with that. Next is data sampling methods, which I will discuss in the next class, just day after tomorrow, on Wednesday. And by the way, Tristan, I will be making changes for that 4th of July situation, where we decided, and I'd like to just bring your attention back to the schedule. Let me pull this out, because I'm going to give this to the staff to make the changes on. And I just want to make sure that we are looking at something we agreed on before. Let me get back to it. The schedule we have. Okay, so we decided to have no class on Thursday, on the 3rd, which is Monday, uh, a week after, and 4th of July is a holiday, obviously. Uh, did we want to push class 17 to the 5th or the 6th? How was it? Do you remember? See, what I'd rather do, and it is also something that I did not discover until yesterday, is that I won't be available on the 5th. So I have to make some changes here. So there will be a change on the class 17, 18th, and 19th. Okay. So all three of these will have to be pushed somewhere outside of this week of 4th of July, or perhaps one class I can take on the 7th, and the rest of the two classes will have to follow after Saturday or Sunday, 9th. So it will be pushed to the 10th of July. That's what's going to happen. The worst scenario, I'll just send the recording if, if you're not available the following week, which is a week after the 7th of July. There would be one class on the 7th, and then the following Monday, I can take the other two. All right. So let's just see if, yeah, I'm going to then remove the class that is on the 3rd and the 5th. That's going to be pushed further, and we'll occupy the Friday for taking one of these. Apparently, class 17 will be on the 7th of July. 3rd and 5th are cancelled. Okay. I'll make the change. I'll have it dropped in the box, in your Dropbox. All right. So thank you so much for coming today and for taking the class. I would see you day after. Okay, Tristan. Thank you so much. Take care now. I'll see you. Have a nice evening. Bye bye.